Good day. This video will introduce the different organic functional groups that you will encounter in biochemistry. Functional groups are defined as set of atoms that we see in molecule structure. They are important because they dictate the molecule's physical and chemical properties. So whether a certain compound will have a high or low boiling point, kung magiging viscous ba sila or not, or whether it will be volatile or not, if it will be basic, acidic, or neutral, all depends on the functional group that a molecule have. In addition, these functional groups determine what reactions the molecule will undergo. In short, kung yung physical and chemical properties ng isang compound ay nakasalalay sa uri ng functional group na meron ito. Let's take a close look at these functional groups to see what they look like. This following shows us the common functional groups that we commonly encounter in biomolecules. The first type of compounds is called hydrocarbons. So under hydrocarbons, we have alkane, alkene, alkyne, phenyl, and benzyl. So the common thing about all of these groups is that they have only hydrogen and carbon. So based on the name itself, hydrocarbon, meron na silang carbon and hydrogen. So for alkane, meron ka lang single bonded carbon and hydrogen atoms. So if you're not familiar with this kind of notations, bawat edge and bawat corner, bawat end ng line na to represents carbon. And those contain also hydrogens. For example, itong end na to, this is CH3, this is CH2, and this one is CH2, and this one is CH3. So that's for alkane, single bonded carbons. Next type, you have the alkene. Ang alkene, meron kang at least isang double bond, as shown here. And then for the next set, you have the alkyne. Ang alkyne naman, meron kang at least one triple bond. And if you have a hexane ring with an alternating double bond, single bond, double bond, single bond, double bond, then we call that phenyl. So wag kayong malilito ha. This structure is actually the benzene ring. Benzene ring yung tawag dyan pag hindi siya nakadikit. Pero kung ididikit mo siya to any carbon-containing group or what are represented by the R group, then yung ring na yan will now be called phenyl. So again, phenyl, if it is attached to any carbon-containing group or represented by the R symbol. Now sometimes, instead of the phenyl ring being directly attached to the R group, meron pa siyang in-between na CH2 group, here. So pag meron kang ganong case, yung whole group na to will now be called benzyl instead of phenyl. So wag kayong malilito, pag merong additional CH2 just before or in between the phenyl ring and the R group, then you call this group the benzyl. And another thing about these hydrocarbon groups is that since it contains only carbon and hydrogen, this group will be non-polar. In other words, hindi sila soluble sa water. So again, this will be non-polar. Now, for the next set of functional groups, imagine na meron kayong alkane. Pero, dudugtungan natin siya ng iba't ibang klase ng electronegative atoms. For example, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, and nitrogen in this case. So, ano ba yung sinasabi natin palagi na electronegative atoms? So, just to refresh your memory, kung nakalimutan nyo na from your general chemistry, electronegative atoms are generally these atoms, sina nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And if you take a look at these values, these are all the electronegativity values. At kung mapapansin ninyo, yung electronegativity values nila are actually greater than the carbon, greater than 2.5. So please remember those N, O, F, Cl, Br, I, and sometimes in a phosphorus and sulfur. So those are the electronegative atoms. Now let's go back to the functional groups. So if we put halogen on the alkane, you now have what we call alkyl halide. Now replace that X halogen by NH2 group, then you now have amine. So yung NH2 group na yan, ang tawag nyo sa kanya is amino group. Okay, so you have an amino group NH2 being attached to carbon, so ang tawag mo na dyan is amine. Now, most often in biochemistry, si amine ninyo will be encountered in protonated form. So pag sinabi mong protonated form, merong ididikit na hydrogen plus. So, dadagdagan mo ng isa pang hydrogen yung NH2, so magiging NH3. And then makikarry over yung plus, kaya si NH3 will have a positive charge. Okay, so huwag kayong malilito. Pag meron kayong nakitang NH3 with a positive charge, that is still an amine functional group. Okay? Now, sometimes, yung amine ninyo are classified, the amine is classified into three: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Anong pinagkaiba? Pag NH2, yung group na nakadikit, then you have a primary amine. Now, replace one hydrogen with another R group. So, meron ka ng dalawang R group, dalawang carbon-containing group. Then, you now have a secondary. And take note, isa na lang yung hydrogen. Now, for tertiary, tanggalin niyo yung isang H, palitan niyo with another R group. So, magiging tatlo na yung R group. R1, R2, and R3. And what you now have is a tertiary amine. So, that's for the amine functional group. Now replace NH2 by a hydroxyl group, OH, and you will have a functional group of alcohol. And then replace hydrogen with a carbon-containing group, R group, and you will have an ether. A similar functional group to alcohol is the thiol. So, kung titignan nyo sa name para mag-sounds like sila. Alcohol, thiol. Ang gagawin nyo lang, tanggalin nyo si oxygen and replace it with sulfur. SH, and you will have a thiol group. Now, replace SH with a cyanide group, SN, and you will have what we call nitrile. Okay? And if you take a look, if we're going to take a close look, these functional groups have electronegative atom, and that electronegative atom will impart polarity to the molecule. And hence, itong mga group ng functional groups nito will be polar. Okay? So again, this will be all polar. Now, there are certain types of functional group na kung titignan ninyo, may similarity sa structure nila. And these are the aldehydes, ketones, acyl halide, amide, or amide, carboxylic acid, and ester, or ester. So kung mapapansin ninyo, they all have carbon double bond O, C double bond O. Yung C double bond O na yan, ang tawag niyo sa group na yan is carbonyl. Okay? So lahat sila ay merong carbonyl group. C double bond O, C double bond O, C double bond O, and so on. Now, if the C double bond O is attached to a hydrogen, the functional group will be aldehyde. Now, replace hydrogen with another R group or carbon-containing group. So, in short, meron ka lang C, 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 and C double bond O. Then, what you have will be ketone. Okay, so take note of the difference between aldehyde and ketone. Si aldehyde, yung isang side niya may hydrogen. Si ketone, wala. Puros carbon lang yung nasa dulo. Now, replace one carbon here with a halogen, X, with symbol X. So, pwedeng F yung nandyan, pwedeng bromine, pwedeng chlorine, pwedeng iodine. Then, we now have acyl halide. Okay, so this is correction. This should be acyl halide. Now, replace this X with NH2 or amino group, and you will have now an amide or amide. So, wag kayong malilito. Yung NH2 group dito, may kasamang C double bond O or carbonyl. So, pag meron kayo yan, ang tawag nyo na dyan will be amide at hindi amine. Okay? Ang amine, walang C double bond O, walang carbonyl group. Now, replace NH2 with hydroxyl group, and you now have carboxylic acid. Then replace hydrogen with a carbon group, R group, then you will have an ester. Okay? Is that clear? Now, sometimes, si carboxylic acid, you will encounter it in a deprotonated form. Pag sinabi mong deprotonated form, tatanggalin lang natin si hydrogen. Tatanggalan natin siya ng H+. And when you remove H+, the structure will now be C double bond O, O minus. At ang tawag mo na dyan ay carboxylate ion. So, pag nakakita kayo ng ganitong form, C double bond O with O minus, we call that a carboxylate, and it is a deprotonated form of the carboxylic acid. Now, aside from those groups, meron tayong mga uncommon functional groups, pero malimit natin siya makita dito sa biochemistry. And those are the phosphorus-containing groups. Ano ba yung mga phosphorus-containing groups? We have four. First, we have phosphate. Kung naalala nyo, ang formula ng phosphate is PO4, 3 minus, right? So, meron siyang 4 oxygen. Kaya meron kang 1, 2, 3, and 4 oxygen, PO4. And take note, 1 oxygen is doubly bonded, P double bond O. Now, if it only has 3 oxygen, then ang tawag mo doon will be phosphoryl. And if you have a phosphate group, pero yung isang carbon, ay yung isang oxygen, dudugtungan mo ng carbon, you have a phosphate ester. And lastly, pag meron kang dalawang phosphate group na pinagdikit, okay, like shown in this structure, P, O, P, then you call this phosphoanhydride. So, itong mga phosphorus-containing groups na ito, malimit natin itong makita sa nucleic acids, as we will see later through the course. Now, sino ba dito yung mga acidic and basic groups? Well, fortunately, madali lang tandaan yun because sa lahat ng nabanggit na to, we only have one acidic functional group. And guess what that is? Okay, pag hindi nyo pa nahulaan, well, nasa name na mismo, it's carboxylic acid. Okay, it's acidic because of this hydrogen, acidic AH here. Kaya siya nade-deprotonate kasi acidic yung hydrogen. So there's only one acidic group and that's carboxylic acid. Ano naman yung mga basic functional groups? Well, maswerte din tayo dahil meron lang din tayong kailangan isang tandaan na basic functional group. And that is amine. So, lahat ng amine, lahat ng may NH2, so, kung primary siya, secondary, or tertiary, all of that are basic. So, pag may nakita kayong nitrogen, pero hindi naman siya nakadikit sa carbonyl group or C double bond O, automatic amine yun. Automatic basic yun. Okay? And the rest of the molecules pala are neutral. They're neither acidic nor basic. Okay? So I hope that is so clear. Alright, so those are the important functional groups. Please take time to memorize the structures and the name of these functional groups as we will refer to them from time to time all throughout our course. Otherwise, mahirapan kayong makasabay sa discussions. This is it for this topic. I hope you are more enlightened. Good luck.